We look forward very much now to hearing from Archbishop Stephen. And I have to say, the Diocese of Sheffield has had more than its fair share of Archbishop Stephen's attention and care over the past 2 or 3 months. Most of you will know that when the two archbishops announced the Church Commissioner's funding for the next triennium, the announcement was made in Balby in Doncaster, and not only the content of that announcement, the uplift in funding that will be available, especially to support the ministry of the church in local communities, in the most deprived neighbourhoods of our diocese. Not only the content of that announcement was good news for the Diocese of Sheffield, it felt like the location of the announcement was good news for the Diocese of Sheffield too. And then Archbishop Stephen returned, that was May, returned in June, partly to help me with my MDR, because bishops do MDRs too. But then also to visit Rotherham Minster, one of our SDF-funded resourcing churches, to hear the stories of the encouraging growth in the congregations at Rotherham Minster, not least through its two arms of outreach, a social supermarket on the one hand and choral outreach into the community on the other. And it was a great encouragement to the team at Rotherham to have Archbishop Stephen present to hear about their work in that way. And here he is in July, back for the third time. I know we're not physically in the Diocese of Sheffield, but we are the Diocese of Sheffield. So would you welcome most warmly, please, Archbishop Stephen. So we'll have a bit of a conversation for 10 minutes or so, and then you're going to talk to us about a church in the north, I think. And I know that when you begin to tell the story of your testimony, that can take all the available time. So just giving us just the potted highlights. Have you always been a follower of Jesus?
So no, I wasn't brought up in a church-going family. I must have gone to church once as a child because I was baptised, but that was about it for church-going and any faith in my childhood. Though I think I always believed, well no, I don't think, I know I always believed in God, which I've since discovered is very common with children, whether they've been brought up in the church or not, a sense of God, but of course completely unformed. So as you've intimated, if I was to give you my whole story, it's quite a long and complicated story. For me, my engagement with God and the church felt a bit like, have you done arm wrestling? You know arm wrestling? When you're arm wrestling somebody who's much stronger than you, but they're kind of toying with you. So you think you might be able to win, but you can't. And so I entered into this. So the story of Jacob really has always meant a lot to me when I came across it. It was a long story. So let me just tell you one bit of the story. So I wasn't brought up going to church. I came into the orbit of the life of the church as a teenager. Obviously, I did become a Christian, in case you're wondering, and. Though I'm still the only person I know who, when they went to a selection conference for the priesthood, didn't really go to church at the time. But that's another story. Today's super well-organised, efficient Church of England would find me out. I mean, I never lied about it. Everyone just took it as read. But that is another story. So eventually, I trained for the priesthood at St Stephen's House in Oxford. I get ordained as a deacon. I serve my title in South London. So you know in your family you have these people you call auntie and uncle, but they're not really your auntie and uncle. So in my family we had my auntie Millie. She was my grandma's best friend, and my auntie Millie was a devout Roman Catholic, the sort of devout Roman Catholic who went to Mass pretty much every day. So when I was ordained as a deacon, she came, I invited her to the ordination service. I think she probably wrote to the Pope for dispensation because I don't think she'd ever been to a non-Roman Catholic church in her life. But she came, she was really pleased for me. And at the party after the service, she told me this. She told me that every day, for like the past 30, 40 years, when she went to Mass, her intention at the Mass was the conversion of our family. Her best friend, Betty, my grandma's family, because none of us, we're all pagans, basically. And that had been her prayer. And if, like the day before I was deaconed, you'd asked me to tell my story, I think I'd have told a story about I wasn't brought up as a Christian. I made these decisions. I decided to do this. I decided to do that. I made a decision to follow Christ. It was all about decisions that I'd made. And then when I discovered that even before I was born, my Auntie Millie was praying for me every day that I would come to know Christ, I suddenly saw my whole faith story in a completely different way. Now, I think, of course, on that day, my Auntie Millie really wanted me to become a Roman Catholic, I think. And who knows, But on that day, I think she was prepared to concede that maybe the Church of England was an acceptable second best.
Good, very good. And COVID has done really strange things to our sense of the passage of time, but I think it was in the summer of 2020 that you became Archbishop of York.
That's right, yeah.
How's that been, and how do you experience the difference between being Bishop of Chelmsford, which you were for 10 years, and Archbishop of York?
Yeah, well, that's another complicated question. I mean, first of all, I need to say that I absolutely loved being the Bishop of Chelmsford. I loved it. It's a huge, complicated, second largest diocese in the Church of England. But I loved it, and I absolutely poured myself into it, and I still miss it hugely and grieve for it. Partly, I think that's because I became Archbishop during COVID. I never had a chance to say goodbye, so there was no goodbye service. And equally, coming to York, there was no hello service. And although, of course, I accept that's how it has to be, it has made me realise how important rites of passage are. And there's many, many people who've got some unfinished business inside of them because those rites of passage have been denied. And that's true for me.
Many in the room.
Yeah. So many of us have had to live with that. But I was ready for a fresh challenge. Much though I loved what I was doing, I was ready for a fresh challenge. And I think probably at some very deep level, I was asking God, where next? What next? I didn't feel God wanted me to retire as Bishop of Chelmsford. And I think, to be honest, Chelmsford probably needed something new. So my reflection, so I have two quick reflections. Reflection number one is, when it comes to vocation, I think we always tend to think about what God is calling us to and very rarely consider what God is calling us from, which is much more uncomfortable thing to think about, Mike. But it must be both, mustn't it? If God is calling us to something, he must also be calling us from something. And it's good for our humility to think, actually, my time might be up in this situation. I've done what I can do, and now actually God needs to oik you out of there because something else is needed. And for me, that's meant becoming Archbishop of York. The main difference, the painful differences, are the additional scrutiny. When I was a bit, who gives a monkeys about what the Bishop of Chelmsford thinks about anything? Even in Chelmsford, Essex is I can say this because I'm from Essex, Essex is a gobby kind of place, and so nobody's much interested in what I had to say, but Archbishop of York, people are very interested. And so, on the one hand, that's a fabulous opportunity for the gospel. which I'm trying to make the most of. But on the other hand, at a personal level, it can be quite painful to have everything you say scrutinised and interpreted and constructed in different ways. So that's quite hard. But if it doesn't sound overly pious, there's only one reason for any of us to accept any post in the church, and that's because we believe God might be calling us. And when I was first contacted out of the blue by the CNC for York, I had a very strong sense that this might be of God. So that's what sustains me. There's a lot of work to do in the Diocese of York, and balancing my responsibilities as a diocesan bishop and as an archbishop is undoubtedly the biggest difference and the biggest challenge. But I do believe that it's really important that a winsome, human, joyful, compelling vision of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ needs to be spoken into the life of our nation. And all I can say is, I know I'll mess it up and I know I'll get it wrong many times, but I do believe that is what God has called me to try to do, and I'm going to try to do it as joyfully as I can.
I've got one more question, but then I want to come back to that and pray for you in that role before I get off the stage and ask you to talk to us about a church for the North. So my last question has to do with big gigs, like this one.
Yeah.
I did find myself wondering, if you had caught COVID, would Archbishop Justin be asked to stand in at really short notice in the way that you had to stand in at short notice for the Platinum Jubilee service? So just tell us a bit about that. I think you had something like 5 days notice to prepare a sermon for an audience of millions on television. Were you nervous?
Well, actually, it was 3 days, and as you'll know, it's true for all of us. They weren't 3 days where there was plenty of space in the diary. They were 3 absolutely full-on days, and I was already committed to writing sermons for 2 other large Platinum Jubilee services here in the north, at York Minster. So there was already sermons that had to be written that week, and then there was this one as well. So yes, I was terrified, but also excited. I have to be honest. Those of you who know me, which I think is a few people here, when I do give my full, to be serialised in 23 episodes, testimony, I usually get to a point in my story where I talk about a call within a call. So I thought God was calling me to be a vicar, a parish priest. When I first went to my first parish as an incumbent, I discovered on day one that that job wasn't really needed. What was needed was an evangelist, a missionary. And I had to rethink my whole ministry through the perspective of what does it mean to go to a parish. I was trained to be somebody. I was trained on the assumption there is a thing called the church, and your job as a vicar is to look after it. But when you get to a parish and there's really nothing there, and the church is dying, you have to think differently. So that was a huge learning curve for me. So I've discovered the call of an evangelist, and I love nothing more than talking about the good news that God has shown us in Jesus Christ. So I was excited. I thought this is a great chance to say something human, joyful, compelling about the Christian faith into the life of the nation. So I haven't been so nervous for a very, very long time as I stepped up into the pulpit at St. Paul's. But I did also think, well, Stephen, this might be why you're the Archbishop of York, that something about what you've been given, you might just be able to say something that will help people connect with the Christian story. Now it's for others to judge whether that worked or not, but that's what I was trying to do, is to seize the opportunity, not to tell the whole story of the gospel, that's often the mistake we make, but to say something which will be intriguing, joyful and compelling.
If I'm allowed to say it, you nailed it.
Ah, well.
Do you have any sense whether Her Majesty appreciated it?
Well, I did actually get a message from the palace that evening, which was really, really humbling. So it seemed like it went down well. With that audience, anyway.
Good. If I may, I'm going to pray for you, and then leave you to speak to us. Loving God, we want to thank you for raising up an evangelist to occupy the role of Archbishop of York at this time. And we thank you for Archbishop Stephen's sense of vocation to this role, to seek to speak the good news of Jesus Christ to our nation in a way that is joyful and compelling. And we pray that you will endue him with all the gifts of your Holy Spirit, that his ministry may be fruitful in the weeks and months and years to come, to the glory of your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pete. Pete, thank you very much. And sisters and brothers, what a great joy to be with you this morning. And before I speak about what I've been asked to speak about, I did want to pay tribute to Bishop Pete and to his oversight of the great Diocese of Sheffield. He may not remember this, but when you'd only been Bishop of Sheffield a matter of weeks, months, not very long at all, and I was booked in. I can't remember, I was giving some sort of lecture or talk in Sheffield itself. I can't remember what the occasion was now. And we went out for a meal beforehand. And I think it had dawned on you, having been in post a relatively short while, just the enormity of the challenge, which is the same challenge facing many, many dioceses. The realization that we can't just carry on doing the same thing. As we know, to carry on doing the same thing and expect a different outcome is the first sign of madness. That we long for our churches to flourish. We long to plant new churches. We long to share the gospel. But, life in the Church of England had become like a game of knockout whist. If you've ever played knockout whist, every time you deal the cards, there's one less. And we just can't go on, just salami slicing the church. Till eventually, the last person left is the Bishop of Sheffield, who's incumbent of however many parishes it is. That we've got to try to do it differently. I know that because I've been a jobbing diocesan bishop, and I look back at my time of Chelmsford with joy, but also with sadness and regret, because we tried things and some of them worked, but some of them didn't work, and that's going to be the same here. Some of the things you're doing, which I find so inspiring and exciting, some of them will grow and bear fruit and flourish, others won't. That's just the way it is. God is inviting us to move into uncharted territory. There's a clue in the title, it's uncharted territory, therefore don't ask for the map. I think what inspires me, I don't know whether Pete or indeed Sophie have used this image themselves to describe what you're doing here. What I see here is leadership by compass rather than map. And it's important to understand the difference. When you lead with a compass, it's because you don't actually know where you are. A map is only useful if you know where you are. If you don't know where you are, a map is completely redundant. But a compass will tell you which direction to go in. What it can't tell you is what the terrain will be like. There might be a river to cross. There might be a mountain to traverse. can't tell you that, but it can say this is the direction in which we need to travel. And we're going to encounter difficulties and challenges along the way, and we will write the map as we go. That's what I see happening in this diocese, and I want to esteem you. I want to thank you for your ambition and your faithfulness, and I want to absolutely assure you of my support for what you're trying to do here. And I want to pay great tribute to the leadership and oversight of this diocese for daring to say, in order for the church to flourish and for every parish to be revitalised and for there to be growth, we are going to have to reset and look at things differently. So Bishop Pete, Bishop Sophie, your colleagues in the senior team, and indeed all of you in the parishes and communities where you serve, I think what you're doing is really, really very exciting. I guess at times it's pretty scary as well. And I'm sure there are times when well, I don't know, I'm sure it doesn't happen in this diocese, but I have met clergy in the York diocese and certainly in the Chelmsford diocese who basically would say to me, look, I understand why you're doing what you're doing, but couldn't you just wait till I've retired? I admire the people who are honest and say, look, it's not that we think it's wrong, it's just we can't face it. We've got 5 years to go. It's just too challenging. I really do understand that and get that. But, this is not our church. It's not our gospel. We are the stewards of what God has given to us. And we have to do what we can to share the gospel and grow the church with everyone everywhere. So thank you for your faithfulness. I've been asked to speak about a vision for the north. It's not going to take long because I haven't really got one. Or should I say, this is kind of like super cheesy, I know a man who does, and that is my vision. My vision, which is the same as the vision for the Church of England. It's for a deep, deep renewal of our life in Christ. That's my hope and my prayer for myself, for the Diocese of York, where I have particular responsibilities, for the Diocese of the Northern Province that I've been called to serve, and for our Church of England. The Americans have a great saying, which is, you can't give what you haven't got. And that's where we must begin. We must begin with the renewal of our life in Christ, with our life of prayer. And from that, everything else will flow. So I trust the leadership of the church in the diocese. I trust the leadership of the church in the parishes and mission units and deaneries, the different configurations of church that are rightly evolving at the moment. I trust that leadership to work out on the ground what will be the best individual strategies in order to fulfill the single purpose of God's church, which is to make Jesus known and build God's kingdom here on earth. My vision and my hope is that I might just wander around the north of England reminding people that God loves them very much, that the Christian faith is real, and that we must say our prayers and pray earnestly, constantly, intentionally, deliberately for that renewal of our life in Christ. So I hope, therefore, that we will work well together. I hope that we will work well across the different traditions that make up the Church of England. I hope we will pay attention to the whole ecosystem of the church, recognising it's always been the case that one size doesn't fit all. I hope we will dare to try new things, but this will only happen if it flows from our life in Christ. And this, of course, chimes pretty precisely with the third of your aims in the kind of Lights for Christ released to shine? Do you call it a strategy? What do you call it? Whatever you call it. And the third of these is to reflect the light we see in Christ. And I'm sure you've had other speakers talking about this with you over the past few days. I'm just going to add to that. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. All of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image, from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. So that is my vision for the church, that we might dwell so intimately with Christ and in Christ that we, with our unveiled faces, will reflect the glory that we see. Years ago, John Taylor, one of the great mission theologians of the Church of England, said that love is the only quality which makes contagious Christians, from whom others may catch the love of Christ. And Tim Schofield wrote, "The people of God are to be in the world as lovers, wooing people through the attractiveness of Christ in them." When I was a parish priest, we kept, on an estate parish, we kept the church building open as much as we could, which isn't always easy, as some of you will know, or at least it's easy to leave it open. It's not easy to keep everything in the building. And although we did lock away precious things, stuff still did get nicked from time to time. One year, the Paschal candle got nicked, which is a bit irritating. Not that Paschal candles cost a lot of money, but it was irritating to have it nicked. And on church the following Sunday, after it had been nicked, this lovely, slightly eccentric holy lady in the congregation came up to me and said, "Oh, Father Stephen," I was Father Stephen in those days, "Father Stephen, I know who stole the Paschal candle." I said, "Oh, right, thank you. So who was that?" And she said, "God sent an angel down from heaven to steal the Paschal candle." I said, "Oh, right, okay, so what makes you think that's what happened?" And she said, "The reason God sent an angel down from heaven to steal the Paschal candle is because we're in danger of forgetting that the light of Christ is meant to shine in us." And I've always remembered and reflected on her words. And I think I've always believed that is how the church grows. It grows through the evident holiness and beauty of the light of Christ shining in us. And I think you've just had a Bible study on that incredible text, "You are the light of the world," which is just so what we don't expect Jesus to be saying. You know, we know elsewhere he says, "I am the light of the world," and that seems to us to be reasonable, proper, and theologically appropriate. But to say we are the light of the world is incredibly beautiful and very, very challenging. That the light that shone so brightly in the face of Christ might shine in our faces and our lives. So I remember years ago, I'm not like a Taizé groupie. I'm sure some of you have been to Taizé. And I could tell you that there isn't time, sadly, lots of horror stories about when I took a group of young people to Taizé. Well, I'll just tell you one story. So they were just like a group of normal young people, student age, and this was early 1990s, fall of the Berlin Wall, and Teze was getting really overrun with young people from Eastern Europe enjoying the new freedoms of movement that they had. And they were struggling to cope with the vast, vast numbers in those years that came, and had a very, very strict no alcohol rule. My group of young people brought some alcohol in with them, and I said, well, look, as long as you're not stupid about it, and just have a drink in the tent in the evening, I'm sure it'll be okay. Famous last words. And so they all got stupidly drunk one night, and the whole group got into trouble, and it totally disillusioned them on the whole Teze experience. So much so that they formed an escape committee, went into Cluny with some water carriers, bought a lot of red wine, siphoned it into Coca-Cola bottles, and ran a kind of black market. They called it Coca-Cola Anglaise, and sold it to East European young people from the back of our tent. It was a total disaster. As I thought it'd be like, these were some great young people, all aged, I don't know, students, 19, 20, 21, that kind of age. And I thought this would be their spiritual finishing school. It kind of nearly finished them off. Anyway, so I'm not a Teze groupie, but it is a place I love. The first time I visited, I was a young adult myself. And I remember sitting at the back of the church when the evening worship is concluding, which I'm sure many of you will have been at. And as you know, the worship, when it concludes, kind of concludes but doesn't conclude. You know the service has ended, you can leave, but it kind of overflows into a time of contemplative worship and singing. And the brothers of the community come and stand around the outside of the congregation, and they're available for prayer, counselling, conversation. And Brother Roger, obviously still alive at the time, the founder of the community, was standing just kind of like 10 feet away from me. And as soon as he came and stood very close to where I was, immediately a great crowd gathered around him. People wanted to talk to him. People wanted him to pray for them. And actually, the famous story in the Bible where the woman with the hemorrhage, the people crowd around Jesus, and the woman with the hemorrhage reaches out to touch him. Suddenly, that story seemed very, very real. These people clamouring and crowding around Brother Roger. But as I sat there, I didn't want to go and talk to him. I didn't want him to pray for me particularly. Like the woman with the hemorrhage who reached out to touch Jesus, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to touch him. I just wanted to hold him, because he seemed to have such a powerful transcendence, a kind of inner luminosity, that all I can say is to be in his presence was to be in the presence of somebody who I can't think of another word to describe it. He shone. There was a kind of, he with his unveiled face, reflecting the glory that he had dwelt in, it was shining out of him. And I felt if I touched him, then something of that would pass to me. So you can see that Bible story became very, very real. Well, the point of all this is it's an embarrassingly simple point. That is available to all of us. That's not something that just happens to special people. And I know this, not because I've read it in the Bible, though, by the way, I have read it in the Bible, page after page after page. It's one of the main themes of Scripture, the way that God changes and transforms human lives so that they become instruments of God's purposes of peace for the world. I believe it because I've also seen it, not just in, massively in Brother Roger, but I've seen it in so many other people. And as you sit there, I'm sure, I hope, I invite you to think of the people you know in your life and your ministry who have been those people for you, or you have seen at work in the parishes where you've served. And so my invitation to you and to the churches of the North is that we make this our main concern. Or to put it really, really simply, what should you do about this? Well, you yourself need to make prayer and the life of prayer and the spiritual disciplines which undergird a life of prayer your chief concern. And you should make teaching other people to pray one of the main, if not the main, priority of your ministry. And here I say this, knowing that we clergy, I know we're not all clergy here, but lots of us are, and we all work for the church in one capacity or another. We are in spiritual danger, aren't we? Because some of you may have heard me say this before, but I'll happily say it again. We go to church more than is healthy for any one human being. And when we go to church, usually it's in some kind of leading the worship capacity. So we say a lot of prayers, we lead a lot of services, we preach a lot of sermons. But the real danger is that intimacy with God that kind of got us into this in the first place, that somehow that is lost to us. And I think there are many of us who've stopped praying. Or prayer has become that professional thing we do when we go to church. And it's paying attention to these things, which is what will make the biggest difference for the church in this diocese, in your parish, and across the North. And here on the subject of prayer, let me quote Rowan Williams. This is like the most unlikely quote from Rowan Williams you've ever heard, because Rowan Williams is talking about prayer. It's a brilliant quote, but he's using the image to describe prayer of sunbathing. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of really find it hard to imagine that Rowan Williams has first-hand experience of sunbathing. I just can't picture that. I can't get my head around that. I mean, I love him to bits and I hold him in high regard, but I just can't kind of see him in his Speedos on the beach. So, although what I'm about to quote I think is a wonderful, wonderful image of what prayer is about, I can't believe it's from first-hand knowledge. So, this is from Rowan Williams on prayer. When you're lying on the beach, something is happening. Something that has nothing to do with how you feel or how hard you're trying. You are not going to get a better tan by screwing up your eyes and concentrating. You give the time, and that's it. All you have to do is turn up, and then things change at their own pace. You simply have to be where the light can get you. So maybe that's my vision for the North. That the Christian communities, ministers and people of the North would be where the light can get them. understanding that prayer, first of all, isn't about what we say to God, it's about what God says to us. St. Paul, in that very irritating way of his, says pray all the time. Now, I don't think he means do that activity we call prayer all the time. He must mean make your life a prayer, make your life a hymn of offering to God. And in order for that to happen, we do need times set aside to be where the light can get us, so that we are transformed into the likeness of God that we see. And we must, as it were, if you'll forgive me putting it this way, we must, as it were, take our clothes off to be where the light can get us. We must allow God to strip us away. There must be somewhere where we are, well, I'll just speak about myself. You know, it's a bit weird being the Archbishop of York, and there's all sorts of, I could have said this to Bishop Pete earlier. The other thing I'm having to deal with is all kind of projections and expectations and fantasies. And it's very easy to get taken in by your own publicity and suddenly start thinking you are an important person. I need somewhere every day where I'm just Stephen before God. And if I don't have somewhere each day where I'm just Stephen before God, the danger is that the light is not going to get me. So, what's prayer? Well, let me just quickly share with you my working definition of prayer. So my working definition is this. Prayer is the lover coming into the presence of the beloved and saying, I love you. That's the best definition of prayer. No definition of prayer works, but that's the best I can come up with. Prayer is the lover coming into the presence of the beloved and saying, I love you. And what I like about that definition is it puts the focus of prayer where it should be, firstly, with God and the activity of the Holy Spirit. And the scriptures do make this very clear, it's just we forget it. That when we do not have the words to say, it is then that the Holy Spirit prays in us, crying, Abba, Father. So prayer is first of all what God through the Holy Spirit does in us. What we call prayer is our response. So God, the great lover, is constantly longing to come into our presence and to assure us of God's great love for us, to give us the affirmation that we need. And then we respond. We respond with our lives, with our prayers. We can bring everything to God, but it must start by our simply coming into the presence of God. And so, dear sisters and brothers, I exhort you to make this your priority, and to teach it to others, to make sure there is space where you can be, where the light can get you. So you'll be relieved to hear I'm coming to a close. And I wanted to come to a close by reading you a couple of things, and then that should give us plenty of time for conversation. So I want to read you, first of all, a letter I received from a priest nearly 10 years ago, which I've never read out in public before, and I only came across it the other day. I don't know whether you keep a file of letters you've received, or this is actually a printed off email, actually. But I do. I keep a file. I'd recommend you to do the same, because we all do need some affirmation. So I keep a file of, occasionally I do get a letter saying, thank you, that was pretty good. Obviously it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally it does happen. And I keep a little file of some of those lovely letters I've received over the years. And I don't look at it very often, but if I'm having a really bad day and feeling really down about stuff, sometimes it's quite nice to get the file out and just remind yourself that actually your ministry has made a difference in someone's life. So I keep that little file. Then I keep another file of interesting letters I've received that I think need further thought. You know, I don't mean in terms of replying to the person, but just because they've said something really worth puzzling. And this was in the second file, and I hadn't looked at it for years. So this was in relation to an invitation to take part in an MDR process by the priest. And this is what this priest wrote to me. Many thanks for blah, 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 blah. I apologise for the late response. And then he says, I won't read you the whole thing. He says, life is very good and very full at the moment. I hugely enjoy the demanding and varied nature of my role. But a recent visit to the monastery at Tulsant Knights, now the monastery at Tulsant Knights is an Orthodox monastery in North Essex. A recent visit to the monastery at Tulsant Knights has proved to be quite a challenge. I went with Bishop Henry and we were offered the most generous hospitality. The challenge for me came as we heard that they have no email, no website, no publicity material, indeed no mission at all, apart from prayer and worship. With such clear conviction about their vocation, they were able to offer us, their visitors, complete presence and attention. Of course, I know that God hasn't called me to a monastic vocation, but I wonder if the time is coming to be a bit clearer about whether I'm spreading myself too thinly across so many things. And I'm reminded of these words from Saint Teresa of Avila. How is it, God, that you've given me this hectic, busy life when I have so little time to enjoy your presence? Throughout the day, people are waiting to speak with me, and even at meals, I have to continue talking about people's needs and problems. During sleep itself, I'm still thinking and dreaming about the multitude of concerns that surround me. I do all this not for my own sake, but for yours. To me, my present pattern of life is a torment. I only hope that for you, it is truly a sacrifice of love. I know that you are constantly beside me, yet I'm usually so busy that I ignore you. If you want me to remain so busy, please force me to think about and love you even in the midst of such hectic activity. If you don't want me to be so busy, please release me from it, showing others how they can take on my responsibilities. That's the quote from Teresa of Avila. Then he continues, I don't find my ministry a torment, but I do wonder if spending 2 hours at the monastery praying the Jesus prayer might be a better use of time than most of the things I usually spend my time doing. I'm really deeply challenged by that letter. And I really don't want you to think I'm somebody who's got this worked out, because I'm definitely not. But I think that priest is onto something. So I'll finish now with a poem, and this is again a poem by a priest. The person who wrote this, Leighton Lee, is the Dean of Calgary in Canada. And he wrote this on a retreat I led, where I was encouraging the priests to write poems. It's a bit of a roller coaster of a poem, so hold on to your chair. think I'll stop with this poem. You know those dreams where you find yourself in front of a crowd in nothing but your underwear? I have them too, but they're of an ecclesiastical flavour. They're always about me discovering that the only available cope is of some dreadful modern design, or in finding that my cassock has been eaten by moths, or even arriving at Mass having left my surplus in the laundry room at home. Isn't it queer that the wearing of vestments should be the subject of my dreams? Vestments, we're told, are meant to erase the personality of the priest so that the congregation will concentrate on the rite and not the celebrant. That may be so, but I'm sure I dream of them because they make me feel safe, because it's easy to hide behind all these silken protections and in the persona of the dean. And I wonder if the reason I fit so easily and immediately into that role is because I really don't want to be known for who I am, because I'm trying to hide my deepest self, because being grandly pompous is so much safer than being authentically vulnerable. Except Christ's power and appeal lies in the fact that he was unafraid to be who he was, and thought it no shame to be stripped naked and lifted high for all the world to see. So I dream of the day when I'll be courageous enough to dance a spiritual dance of the 7 veils. Drop all pretenses and pretensions and stand emotionally naked before the church. It won't be pleasant, and it sure won't be pretty. But it will be real, and at least I'll be ready to truly put on Christ and finally learn that for those who do so there is no shame, but rather the glorious liberty found in being found in him and in being given the greater dignity of the meek king. That poem deserves an amen. So I do apologise for not having anything more profound to say than I think we should say our prayers, but I'll be very happy to receive questions and have some conversation in the time remaining to us. Why don't you start with just a minute or so? There's people online. They can't go into groups, can they? We don't have time. So we'll go straight to questions. No, we don't have time for that either. Oh, don't we? Oh, shout it out.
Just a quick one then, as because I know that you are a primate of England. Reading about Cosmo Gordon-Lang, one of your predecessors, one of the things that he often did was call the whole nation to prayer. And I think that maybe the role that you and Archbishop Justin have is to do that. And can we place prayer again at the heart of our nation and really call people to prayer? Because I encounter people that aren't yet professing Christians, or who are people who are just starting to journey, and they pray. A lot of people pray who aren't even professing Christians yet. And I think if we do place prayer at the heart of our evangelism, then I do think that actually there'll be many more people that will join the song.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. Most of the research tells us that, statistical research tells us that, let's say, 60% of people say they believe in God. There's usually 70 or 80% of people say they pray. It's a weird statistic, but it's consistent that people pray, even if they're not sure who they're praying to. the national vision of the Church of England has at its centre the invitation that we centre our lives in Christ. And that is very specifically meant to be a spiritual and theological renewal about our life in Christ and as disciples of Christ. But I certainly hear the invitation to make a more specific call to prayer. Thank you. I thought we had another 5 minutes or so. Perhaps we don't. So should we stop?
We've probably got time for just one more question,
Right.
if there is one burning in the room. Otherwise, you can use your Natty app, and then we can always raise those questions a little bit later. But if there's anyone with a particular question that wants to say anything now, I've wowed them into silence. Wonderful. In that case, can I just say a huge thank you. We're never going to forget Rowan Williams in his Speedos, are we? That obviously isn't the word we want you to take away. But I first met Archbishop Stephen when I was only just 20 years old in an urban priority area parish in Bradford, where I was on placement in a traditional Catholic parish, and you came to help us to prepare for a mission. And it changed my life. I've never forgotten the opportunity that gave me to think about a call to evangelism and prophetic evangelism. And from the response in the room as you were speaking earlier, when you could have heard a pin drop, you're still challenging us and encouraging us, and me particularly all these years later. So can we just say a huge thank you so much.